Thank you. Hopefully everybody can hear me well. And we'll go a little bit over above ground fuel oil storage tanks. We'll be real technical about it at that point. From here on out, we won't be technical. But just a little background, been a home inspector now since 2004, licensed in Connecticut and Virginia, as Virginia will be my new home in maybe about a year or so. And then so I became licensed in Virginia, so I can cover both states at this point. So let's talk a little bit about fuel oil tanks. You know, it's one of these things that not a lot of people have these. I mean, they're very common in the Northeast, and other areas they're less common. And some of the folks that I get, my clients, they're very nervous about oil tanks. So I thought maybe this might be a good thing for Cyber ASHI and the online meeting group. So we'll go through a little bit about this here. Let's see here. Let's see, how come I don't have control of this down arrow? There it goes.
There you go.
So, you know, basically, I want you to be able to identify the tanks, what kind of defects to look for, fuel oil safety devices, et cetera, et cetera. You know, there are some challenges to inspecting fuel oil storage tanks. So we want to make sure that you understand those challenges. There are some things that may be just a report and move on thing, or there's an actual defect. We want to give you some guidance, maybe how to go ahead and go ahead and identify that. You know, as always, local code and compliance regulations are not part of my discussion because they vary greatly. But make sure you follow your rules, your SOPs, your state and local code for when it comes to this. Make sure you understand that and report based on your state SOP or your ASHI. We're based on the Connecticut one here, and we'll be discussing based on how it would be in Connecticut, which is quite frankly a lot simpler than I report on. Okay. Why does not this change? There we go. You're not getting all this go to meeting stuff on the page. Fuel oil tanks. That looks good. Okay, good. You know, what type of tanks, oil tanks are in homes, you know, what to look for, what constitutes a leak. Some of it may be just spillage. You know, really spillage you clean up and move on. Leaks you fix and report. You know, how to report that. You know, how long does an oil tank last? Because they don't last forever. One of the things that you have to realize that unlike maybe propane tanks or other things like that, the homeowner does own that oil tank. It's their responsibility. So they really need to know what's going on with it. There's some new challenges with oil tanks and oil equipment with some of the new biofuels that are out there, and we'll discuss that a little bit. So, you know, this is basically the oil tanks you'll find above ground in basements. We have mostly basements here. Sometimes they're in garages, sometimes they're under stairs or even externally in above ground installations. You know, standard tank, you find mostly 275 gallon, which is in the upper left. And they have 330 gallon, depending on your local code. That may be the maximum of 330 gallons. Tanks. We'll talk a little bit about that. And then there's some newer bladder style units that are out there. It's a galvanized enclosure, sort of looks like a refrigerator, quite frankly. There's a poly bladder on the inside. They're more expensive, but they tend not to leak because of poly bladder. And they're kind of a neater installation. And quite frankly, with these, luckily, there's not a lot to look at. I mean, just look for exterior leaks. The 275 gallon tanks are, you know, generally single installation, sometimes two. There's a single installation and a double installation. Those happen to be 330, so they're a little bit bigger. Their lifespan is about 20 to 30 years, and that's the industry standard. So really, if you go into a house that was built in the 60s and that oil tank looks like it's original, it's probably time for a change. Sometimes you can find them outdoors, and on a pad like we see down on the left. Sometimes we see them laying on their side. Those are usually in crawl spaces and tight installations. They're just a different controls and connections, but generally they all are the same. One of the things we look for is leaks. Leaks are very, very important to look for. Seepage, in general, you won't see dripping oil tanks. You'll see is seepage. It looks like it's wet. That's one of the things you need to really look at and pay attention to, because that is an indication of leakage, and it's time to go. Sometimes you see them at the fill and vent pipe. You'll see shiny oil there. That'll give you a good look at that. We have some examples of that coming at. Also look at the boiler or furnace, water heater, or supply. Check for any leakage there. And it's red in color. You really can't miss it too much. Look for, it's speedy dry. If you see piles of speedy dry in different places, it's lazy service people that aren't fixing the leaks. They just put speedy dry there. If different patching techniques that are no longer they're no longer acceptable, but they're out there. There was an old way to do that. You took a magnet and you stuck it on a leak, and it just stayed there. They're really weak. There's like a fiberglass, like we fixed our old Volkswagen Beetles. How many times have we done that? So they slap the fiberglass on. Sometimes they stick a screw in the hole. All of those are no longer at all acceptable, and if you see that, that tank should be replaced. Rust is inevitable. These things rust. What you really want to look for is very heavy, excessive rust. A lot of these tanks will be rusted. So you just, look at it, pay attention to it, and if it's excessive and the tank is older, recommend replacement. It's the best thing for everybody. The fill and vent material and size. This is kind of important because that's changed over the last few years. Sometimes you can find you'll find copper. I've seen CPVC, PVC, and other materials as feed. Really should be iron pipe. Some jurisdictions do allow other materials, but iron pipe is the best. The vent pipe nowadays should equal the same size as the fill pipe. Big reason for that is that delivery trucks deliver oil a lot faster than they did even 10 years ago. The whole idea is to get in and out. So you could get trucks that deliver number 2 fuel oil anywhere from 80 to 300 gallons a minute. So they're there for just a short period of time and getting out. Well, that puts a lot of pressure on the tank. And if you do not have the same size vent stack going out that you have coming in, the air pressure that gets built up in there could rupture the tank. So I call it out. I recommend that folks do call it out. It's an easy upgrade, and quite frankly, it's better for everybody. The age of the tank, you're looking at old tanks, it's kind of easy to identify that. If you see a green tank, those are pretty old. Usually, we're looking at 30s, 40s, 50s there. Those are usually pretty old, and that's a good indication of just recommending that they get replaced. Sometimes now you see the red tanks. They were built in the late 60s, early 70s. They're kind of a red, almost like a primer material color. You might have painted your Volkswagen with that, but those are very thin. They were cheap, and they don't last the 20 or 30 years. If you see those and they're looking a little bit older, I would recommend replacing them just due to age. Black and gray are common now. One way to kind of tell an age of a tank is if there's handles or grab bars at the end of the tanks. Newer tanks have grab bars. Some of the mid-age tanks and back don't have grab bars. So that's a quick indication for us as home inspectors when we look at it. Oh, it's got grab bars. It's not old, but that doesn't mean it's not bad. It's just to understand that it's probably a little bit newer. Feed locations where the fuel oil comes out. On the bottom is early age, and is now. That's what we see now. We want those at the bottom. If you see one on the side tank, another indicator of an older tank. And sometimes, depending on the installation, you'll see one coming out the top. That's fine too. That's not a problem. The oil supply lines, unsleeved oil supply lines, generally copper tubing. That's one of the things you want to report. Unsleeved copper is it can react with concrete. It can easily damaged. We like to see them in a sleeve. Sometimes I even see them in electric seal tight, soft conduit. Anything to protect that oil line is preferred. Sometimes you see it in the blue conduit too that they stick it in. There's also a product on the market that's got a poly or rubberized seal on it that works really good. Oil supply lines in concrete, I call these out, especially on older homes. That copper is going to react with the concrete and start to deteriorate, and it could be a leak there that shows up and doesn't avail itself right away, and you could be losing oil there and causing quite a damage. Oil safety valves and electrical disconnects, etc. Some are missing or incorrect disconnects. You just pay attention to those. The safety valves are important. They sometimes are called firematics. They let go when in a fire and stop the oil supply. So you want to watch for those. And not a gate valve. Sometimes you see just a straight gate valve on there. That's not acceptable for stopping oil. And if you have a garage installation and they're unprotected with with no balusters or bollards to keep a car from driving through it, that's something you want to call out. Here's some patching examples up on the top right around in here. You'll see where there's the fiberglass painted on there to keep it from leaking. Looks like there might have been multiple patches on this. As you can see, it's a side discharge for that. This here is the fuel filter. You have an unprotected fuel oil line. This is the firematic right in that upper location there. That it's a bimetal strip. If there's a fire, it melts and closes the valve.
Hey, Bob.
This one here was a nice patch job. They went all the way around the whole seam, painted it silver and everything. But that was not a pretty sight.
Hey, Bob.
Yeah.
Are oil companies supposed to inspect the tanks when they're delivering oil to new customers?
To new customers, it depends on the oil dealer. I'm finding a lot of my customers now are going with the spot deliveries. They're not going with traditional oil dealers because they want to save a few pennies on that 275 gallons that they're getting. And the tanks are not maintained anywhere near what they should be. The full service dealers do that. The people you hire to automatic deliveries and service your equipment, etc. But nowadays, people set it and forget it. They don't really care, and they're not even looking at them. Matter of fact, they try to hide them most of the time. So that's a challenge for us.
And then there was one other question back a little ways. How should the two types of pipes be distinguished? They've known delivery people filling oil in the vent pipe causing problems.
Yeah, it's on the exterior. There'll be a cap that they screw off. There's two different kind. One is just an iron cap. I mean, we're experienced home inspectors here. Just an iron pipe cap. And then there's the ones that most oil delivery companies use now. It's called a scully cap. And what that does is that's got a threaded rod that only is right on the nozzle. So they have to thread the nozzle onto the scully cap so they can fill there. So the vent and the is not fillable. in general. I mean, most of your oil dealers are using the Scully caps now.
Should there be a concrete well around the tank to hold the oil if it leaks?
That there is a local code thing. Some I see in 16 years, I saw 2. And so in my area, it's not required. It's not even talked about, but I do see them. I do see dams, like if you have like a French drain system, you know, for a wet basement, I'll see like a little raised dam around there to keep the oil out of the French drain if it does leak a little bit, but it's not going to contain 275 gallons. Again, that'll be a local code. No, understand what your local code is on that.
Gotcha. Thanks.
Yeah. Is that it, Sean? All right.
Yep.
All right. So here's some examples of tanks. I just want to put some stuff in here. The tank on the left, you notice that whole tank there it looks like it's oozing oil, because it is. And that's what a leaky tank looks like. It does have it does look like it's leaking a very little bit. It's not always a dripping, oil flowing leak. So that's one thing you want to note. The call out right there is that it's got a side discharge for the fuel, so it's an older tank. It's green. It's got a lot of things going for it. I would say in this household location, they've had work done, because there is a shielded oil supply tank right there, or feed right there. So they've done a little bit of work on it, maybe not as much as they really should have. Over here, red tank, I'm looking extra hard at that. You can see some surface rust here. They put a second tank in and they buried the older tank. So when it comes time for replacement, they're going to have to take things apart. It's going to be challenging for sure. But as you can see here, they did a lousy job with their couplings, etc. There's a little bit of oil leaking out here. There's a little bit of oil leaking here, and there's some coming from the vent pipe over here. In 2 tank installations, one side's the fill and one side's the vent. So this is this vent. You can see it's smaller than the fill. So this is the primary fill tank. Then the oil fills up, goes over to this tank, and then vents out. This here, again, if it, as we know as home inspectors, any iron pipe really should be doped up really good. This one's not, because it's leaking a little bit. But that, for me, this would be a call out to say, get those, first of all, redo, get the proper size vent, but also, redo the fittings. And a relatively easy fix, no sirens, no excitement, but really, that's something that should be pointed out, because it will ooze, and you'll probably get a little fuel oil spill every time it fills. You'll get that smell in the air. This one here, again, you can see the leakage at the couplings and the threads. This is very common, very, very common. You see this a lot, that the couplings just leak, the threads leak. Again, an easy fix, but we definitely would point that out. We really didn't care about the asbestos insulation right there, so just point that out. And we have the 2 red oil tanks here. But as you can see, it was challenging to look at these because they're covered. So just understand that when people hide stuff, they don't want to see these tanks. So you sometimes, I've seen walls built around them where you can't even see the tank. That's reportable in my case. You don't know if that's leaking or not, or to what extent. At least it's reportable with a note, oil tank was covered or blocked from complete, inspection. Recommend removing stuff, you know what I mean. But that's one of those things you want to be safe at, yourself. We got a little leak here, speedy dry. Oh, that's a point out. The gasket's probably bad. This is the filter. Gasket's probably bad. It leaks like crazy. So they keep throwing speedy dry there. You can see it leaks a little bit. Unsleeved fuel line, worth a call out. Bottom feed, so the tank's probably not super old. Sometimes you see the Firematic just full of oil because they leak a little bit. but you can see that's all wet. So the threads here, these are just threaded into the tank, probably leaking a little bit. And as you can see here again, it looks like they painted some dope on there to try to do it without taking it apart because they were lazy. But fuel oil is very shiny. You'll know when you see the top of the filter, shiny. That's telling you right there there's leakage. Again, here's some drippage under the tank. That tells me something's going on there. If you look real close, there's oil drips all along the spine of the tank. Very, very common. You might want to just point that out, that it's leaking tank and you want to have that fully inspected. Don't ever, ever touch an oil leak, because if you poke it, it's just weak enough, you could go through. And you're not holding back 275 gallons of fuel oil. Don't touch it. Yeah.
In seismic areas, should the tank have some type of strapping, not just the feet in the ground?
They should be strapped. And again, seismic areas, that's very specific to your location. So it's a great question. We're not seismic here, although parts of Virginia are, but I don't know about seismic coding there. But if it's seismic, I would say that it should be, no doubt about it, should at least see it strapped.
Okay. And
yeah.
Are there any risks with an unsleeved fuel line?
Risks for damage is the biggest thing. So that's about the only risk. It could get somebody stores some stuff there and hits it, and maybe just could crack it. We know that copper tubing is soft. Could open up one of the connections, etc. So it really should be sleeved, and if it just for protection, especially if it's in concrete.
Okay, one more thing. In older style tank vents had a whistle in them to warn the operator that when they're filled, to prevent accidental overflow.
Yep.
Is there any kind of safety device associated with the high velocity fills?
The whistle is still the same thing. It's just that they're still listening for it, but quite frankly, what they're listening for now, the whistle to they hear the gurgle, quite frankly. But yeah, the whistle. Let's get a tank here. The whistle is right there on the top of the tank, and that's where the whistle is.
But they would be standing outside, right?
Yes, and it comes out the vent, and so the vent and the fill are in close proximity, so that's how they hear it.
Gotcha.
Yeah, good question. So this one here, little catch bucket, it's leaking like crazy. I mean, just fix it, But side discharge, it's an old tank. As you can see, there's an abandoned fuel line here that's in the concrete. I leave it up to you whether you call that out or not. It could have leaked, it might not have leaked, but at some point, probably the equipment was changed, and the dealer, the oil dealer, or the HVAC person abandoned this. I see this quite commonly, and just put in a fuel line above the concrete. Again, a big pile of speedy dry. You can see where it's leaking out all over the place. There's an O-ring there, leaking over here. More leaks. I mean, how long has this been leaking? Look at it's a porcelain pan. So look at the leaks over here. Really watch for these excessive leaks. If you see excessive leaking, recommend replacement. This one here is leaking bad, needs replacement. The reason why these patches are not acceptable is the pressures that are put on the tank nowadays. So we usually call those out and say, that's it, replace the tank. It's just not acceptable. There's a sleeve fuel line there. That's the kind you buy that's already covered. Here's an unsleeved in concrete. I would call that out and say, just understand that this is an old tank, old installation. that, the copper and concrete react, you could not have an unknown leak. Got an old installation here with a new fuel line. Why they didn't just replace the tank at the same time, I don't know. Again, probably a cost situation. People just don't want to do that, pay for, tanks, etc. They just, they want to reduce the cost.
What are some general costs for replacement of the tank?
Tanks, again, that's going to be dependent on your area, but a tank in the Northeast, you're looking at anywhere from, $2,000 to $3,000 or more, depending on, the location, if it can get in or out. Understand that the oil that's in the tank technically should not be transferred to the new tank. That oil needs to come out, and because it's usually full of sludge, and it needs to be all sucked out, vacuumed out, taken to a environmental facility to be disposed of. They burn it. And in Connecticut, we have 2 facilities. One had a big fire, so now we got a single facility, which raised the cost. I'm seeing $3,000 or more for tank replacement right now. So again, so it just doesn't come around to bite you. You want to make sure that you talk to you recommend replacement, and don't be shy about it. You don't want those surprise phone calls.
What about just the line replacement?
The line replacement, it would be minimal, that a few $100s to replace the line, because generally they're usually in close proximity. Again, the more complex the installation, as you see in the one up on the side, the boiler was right over here, so it's just running along the foundation and let it rip. But sometimes they're in remote locations, so you got longer runs, different ways you have to do it, etc. So yeah, a few $100 to a few $100. I don't see them being over $1,000. That would be a heck of a installation if it costs $1,000.
Gotcha.
Yep. If you have an oil tank that's blocked, you can't see it, report it. Here's one here where they put a little access door so they can see the fuel gauge, which was actually pretty low. But this was leaking. So I reported, the portion of the tank that we could see at the vent pipe was leaking. So, I reported that. This one here I reported is, I can't inspect this tank. Surprise. Clear out the area. I'll come back and look at it if you want. But, quite frankly, if it's covered like that, I know we're not supposed to quote unquote COIA, but at least put a note in your report saying that it was, because as soon as those people move, that's going to be wide open. And who knows what they're going to find. And I just want to reiterate, don't touch or poke a leaking tank. Don't. Just don't do it. So here's an oil line leak. We were talking about exposed oil lines. This one happens to be right next to the chimney. Notice a little leak here, little leak over here. This one happens to be feeding not only a furnace in this case, but a oil-fired water heater. There's a leak at the burner. Big pile of speedy dry. Really? I mean, fix it. I mean, they come and tune these things up and they don't fix them. Here's a, general, this is an oil house, tank right there, surface mounted. So they changed out the oil lines. Notice the feed is on the wall side. So you're gonna have a little challenge changing the filter, but it can be, hot water heaters, oil fired, furnaces, boilers. This is a beautiful installation, by the way. See, this is in the plastic flexible EMT, or it's not EMT, but duct. Saying that, I see that a lot. It's protected. I'm happy with it. This one's buried. Hot water oil tanks have such a recovery rate. I tell people, if you're staying with oil, think about it. They're not the end of the world, even though people don't like oil. Underground oil tanks, while this isn't about that, there is evidence of them around. And if there's an underground oil tank, you really need to report that. That could be leaking and you would never know it. This is a common, abandonment or at least disconnected. We don't know it was abandoned because there was no documentation on that. This one here was still in use. Gate valve coming in. This one here is a backflow device, older installation, still in there. This one here happens to be an abandonment. It was right by the tank. Just kind of sitting there. We know that that was disconnected, but then again, we don't know what's going on outside. This one here is multiple connections, so they had different types of heating equipment, and I mean, all over the place. It was, a plumber's dream, I guess. But that's a in-use buried oil tank. Again, another in-use buried oil tank, so in use that they actually replaced the oil line. They didn't put the return line in. Some of them have because of the pressure, they have like a pressure loop where there's a return pressure, so anything it bypasses goes back to the tank. They took that bypass off. Probably not a big deal, but the buried oil tank is.
Hey, Bob.
This is what yeah.
How often should the filter be changed?
Yearly, annual, with the tune-up. Absolutely. Okay. And that's one thing with oil, anything oil, impress upon your clients that it absolutely needs annual service. Those filters get all clogged up with a lot of sludge. The filters, there's a small filter at the boiler that runs into problems. There's the nozzle. The nozzle wears because of the friction from the oil, and then so you get bigger droplets and you get less efficient oil. You need to tune them up, no doubt about it.
Okay, and
yep.
One more. Is the seal draft hood for an oil water heater interchangeable with a gas-fired water heater, or is there a reason the oil-fired water heater is vented differently than most of the gas water heaters I see?
Yes. This one you can't see it, unfortunately. In oil-fired equipment, it's called a barometric damper, as opposed to the draft hood that you see on gas tanks, gas water heaters. The barometric damper sits on the side of the tank, side of the flue. It's round and it's pivoted at the top. And what happens is, as the fire starts for the oil-fired equipment, the flue is technically colder, and it allows more air in to draft that fire until the fire gets going and the flue heats up, and then the damper closes. So it just allows that draft to get going, the fire, so you can feed the fire. Where unlike a gas hot water heater or any other gas appliance with a draft hood, it's just pulls it in the side. But with the oil, you only need it for startup, and once it's heated up, it closes. It closes by itself. It's just automatic.
But they're not interchangeable, right?
No, absolutely not. Different fire. As a matter of fact, there's a barometric damper right at the top of this boiler, right there, and that little door will open up as soon as it fires, and very short period of time, as soon as that flue heats up, it'll just close. You may get a little squeak from it or whatever, but it's nothing like a draft hood. It's completely different.
Thank you.
Yeah. So on the exterior, you look for, this is a vent pipe on the exterior for a buried oil tank. Couldn't find the fill. Does that mean it was removed? We don't know. Typically they take everything out. But maybe they didn't take out the vent pipe, they just left it in place. Report it. You don't want to take the chance of having a 1,000-gallon tank under there leaking and then be there. So just report what you see, especially if you find evidence of a buried oil tank and you don't see anything outside. Just say there's evidence of it. Ask the current owner for documentation of its removal. In this case, I reported, I saw a vent pipe, did not see a fill pipe. I'm concerned. Get with a fuel oil dealer that's going to do a location and find out that tank has been removed. This one was still in place. They're not next to each other necessarily in a buried oil tank. That tank goes like this, parallel to the house, and the vent is off to the side. That's a 1,000-gallon tank. So they're there for, and there you go. Remember you were talking about the fill earlier? This is just, like I said, just an iron cap. Scully caps look a little different. And if you look up Scully cap, you'll see it. So the bladder tanks, just want to let you see what they look like. Here's a cutaway. Thank you to Roth for allowing me to use that picture. But there's bladder on the inside, and you can put multiple tanks together. This is a beautiful installation. It's just absolutely gorgeous. You know, everything's all lined up. There are still craftsmen out there, but they're more costly. There's no doubt about it. They have a little leak indicator that's right over here, a little pop-up, sort of like on your Thanksgiving turkey, and there's a little thing that floats if it starts leaking. They're nice. Manufacturer says they'll last 30 years plus. They're nice. They look nice and neat. They're expensive, really expensive. Different types of fuel gauges, the conventional float style. They have some ultrasonic gauges that are out there now. I recommend to my customers, if you're going to go with a spot oil delivery, to get one of those, to have one put on. For the simple reason is they don't even look at their oil tank. They just run out of oil, and then all of a sudden they're calling around. You see it on Facebook all the time. I ran out of fuel oil. You know, it's February. Really, just be smart about it. Filters can be located just about anywhere, at the tank, at the burner, or both. A lot of times my installations at both. Exterior tanks, they really should be in exterior enclosures, especially in cold climate. You're worried about snow damage, etc. Much like other things like, you know, tanks and stuff like that. There's not a real danger being near the house, but you want it protected. So you just make sure, and it should be on a concrete pad as a minimum. And believe it or not, oil tanks have exterior ratings. They're a little thicker material. The legs are welded on a little better, etc. But I see interior tanks outside all the time. It's just right on the label. You know, you look at it and it'll say rated for exterior use, rated for interior use. If you can find it, it's easy. It's pretty easy to identify. In the garage, it should be protected. Abandoned oil tanks and fills should be removed. Some places require this. I know my friends in Rhode Island, right next door, they have a state law that says that the fills have to be removed. There's no such requirement in the great state of Connecticut, but I see them cut off with a Sawzall right at the side of the house. God forbid the guy goes to the wrong address. They say, "Oh, we don't have oil delivery." Yeah, but what if the guy goes to the wrong address? And then, you know, just lets it rip. He's not paying attention. You know, 275 gallons of oil in your basement before you know it. Oil safety valves, and we'll talk about some of that stuff. Yeah, go ahead.
What is the proper protocol for tank disposal or abandonment?
Yeah, the proper protocol is to remove the tank and the oil, right? Any oil that's in there, and oh, and then he wants to know if it's a buried tank. Well, it's removable. In my state, it's required to be removed, and it has to be permitted, you know, and all the paperwork. Does that mean it happens? No, we all know that. But some people, they fill it with sand. Okay, I've heard that. Well, we filled it with sand. Well, how did you fill it with sand? What really should happen is it should be cut open, cut the top off, suck out all of the sludge and the oil, and then fill it with sand so they know it's full. A lot of, you know, less than excited people that do this, they just pour it down the vent until the vent is, or the vent or the fill until it's full of sand, and then they cut it off and leave it. And what if that collapses? Much like a abandoning of a septic tank. Yes, you do have to test the soil. Yeah, I know. Yes, you do have to test the soil as you do it. When they remove it, they actually take field samples. In my house, I had one. They took out 42 yards of soil before they found soil that was not contaminated. So it should be tested as in the field. And then they took out another 5 yards or so, and then they took the samples for the lab. So that's that. Phase one, no, I don't think so. You just need documentation that it was done. If it's done per state regulation, the testing is done as a soil at that point. You can't clean the oil after it comes out of the tank. It needs to be destroyed. That goes usually, the cost usually goes along with the removal of the tank. They'll say, we'll say it's got a half a tank of fuel. That's done. That's figured in the cost, and that company takes it to the environmental company to be burned. So yeah, it's the cost for contamination cleanup. Well, 42 yards of soil. Think about it. You know, so the cleanup can be, you know, a few $1,000s to tens of thousands of dollars. I heard in my cellar spent $25,000 to fix their mess. That's too bad, unfortunately.
Hey, Robert.
Yeah. How we doing?
Here in Virginia, we have state law. We have a fund so that homeowners only have to pay $500, and the state covers the rest for oil tank removal.
That's great. That's really good. We don't have that here. You own it, and it needs to be removed, kind of thing. So you know, it's kind of unfortunate here. There is no help from anybody on that. No, none.
The permits in
nice.
Virginia, the permits in Virginia come from the fire marshal.
Yeah, in Connecticut also. Again, Connecticut is 169 towns, so we don't have a county seat here. So some towns care, some towns don't. I mean, you could go to your town and say, hey, you know, I'm going to take out an oil tank, and you know, the guys doesn't. You say, okay, and other guys, you know, they come out and do the inspection and keep the records. It depends on the town. 169 towns, 169 ways to do it. Most buried tanks are 1,000 gallons. So these are different types. These are the whistles and the different types of gauges. These are the float style gauges. This one's older. This one's more modern. These are a couple of different ultrasonic gauges that are out there. They're nice because they just an app on your phone, or some of them have a little box. They're not that expensive, a couple $100. I recommend folks, especially nowadays, that are really into the spot market, put one of these on. You don't want to run out of fuel in February. So different installations here. Here's a filter at the tank, filter at the boiler. Geez, this happens to be an installation that's real close to where I am right now. And this is a filter going in at this one didn't have one at the tank, but it had it at the this happens to be a furnace, and it's leaking. So these here Tiger loops, usually for more high efficiency boilers, etc. They do an extra screening of the fuel. So there's a loop here. That gets changed, that gets changed, and that gets changed. I have actually 3 filters for my boiler, and just changing up my boiler, I went from I saved 35% on fuel oil consumption year over year going to a high-end, high-efficiency boiler. Different enclosures for exterior. The Roth exterior, they have a nice little cover that goes over, protects the lines. Protects it from snow damage. These contain oil. These here will contain the volume of oil. There's a scully cap right there on that. So this one here you have to open up to get into. But those are nice. This is a nice installation. Very nice installation. Garage bollards, very nice protecting. They can be either buried kind or the kind that are bolted in. anything that's going to stop this. I've seen them where they're just sitting there in the garage, and there's a bicycle here, and the car leans up against the bicycle. Ridiculous. This one here is even a tiny vent, as you can see. There's regular feed here, and inch and a quarter right there. Iron pipe, really small. Nice clean installation here. Bottom feed. The thermal safety device here should have one above all your equipment for the electrical feed. This one here happens to be at the Tiger Loop. A disconnect, very important, at the top of the stairs or the entrance into the boiler area or furnace area. The reason why these safety devices are so key, fuel oil, unlike gas, which got all kinds of safety devices in it to shut the gas off. There's no way to shut the gas off, or excuse me, the oil, because oil has a pump and it's electrically run. That pump will run even on fire. So if you remove the electricity, the pump will shut off. You'll stop spraying oil. Theoretically, you take away the fuel source. So the switch at the top of the stairs, that's there to say, hey, I got a fire at my boiler. You flip the switch. And I explain to people that. This one here is at the junction box at the top of the, above the oil-fired equipment. If a fire starts there, this will melt and pop and open up the switch, take away the electricity. If there's a fire near the tank, this will melt, pop, close the valve. So there's multiple ways to shut the oil off in a fire situation. You don't see these a lot. They're called vacuum safety valves. Also, you hear them as oil safety valves. What they do is they keep the oil from flowing without a positive pressure sucking through it. You don't see these a lot. You see them more on commercial installations. What you want to do is you want to, it's not really a residential thing, but I'm starting to see more and more of them. I think some of the better oil dealers are starting to use. So here's the sideways tank, but this one here was not an oil tank. It says kerosene here. Very important, the fill said kerosene on it also. I didn't get a picture of that. You don't want to mix this like fuels. I mean, very easily, someone could fill this with fuel oil and this kerosene heater would be a fire hazard. So, just know that that tank looks like an oil tank. Fire suppression system in a house with a well. These look like oil tanks at first glance. Then you start seeing the pump and other things. But at first, when you first glance in the basement, you see these two tanks. They really do look like oil storage tanks. This is an abandoned tank. How do I know that? It's disconnected right here. I wrote this up and said, you should get out of here. There was a little bit of oil in the tank. But this, again, horizontal installation, feed from the top. This was an oil safety valve or oil, the vacuum gauge. It was kind of a nice installation, but they switched over to gas, but they left it there in the crawl. This one's in the crawl space. Notice it's very low. So I just want to talk a little bit about oil here. The newer blended fuel oils, and a lot of times we see them called biofuel. There's been identification now, and a couple of seminars I've done here with my local organization. The oil dealers were very clear about this. They're corroding tanks faster than ever before. Older tanks, especially, because the biofuel traps the moisture and gets into the sludge and just starts rotting the tanks away. So when you have an older tank and now they're starting to switch over to blended fuels, you're starting to get a situation where tanks are just disintegrating. So older tanks, stress on your client, they should consider getting that tank changed. Put it high on their list, more so than painting the bathroom, really. You know, especially in flips, you know, they paint everything. You got to really look at the tank and make sure it's an older tank, you know, to help your client out. You know, they're also going after some of the common, the pumps, the pump that's on the side of the oil burner. Not so much the European models. I happen to have a Riallo boiler burner that's not affected, but you know, the common ones that that are, you know, made in the U.S., they seem to be disintegrating all of the gaskets and everything on the inside of the pumps. So they're seeing a lot of pump failures on oil burners. So again, especially older units. So gotta pay attention to that. Oil service valves are failing at a higher rate. I can't stress on everybody enough to pay attention, especially if biofuel is big in your area. Like most of my oil dealers in my area are forced to use biofuel by the state, depending on your volumes, I think, but I think that'll change. So just, it's not good for the equipment. It's like anything else, you know, every action's got a reaction. So, you know, don't be shy to recommend replacement, even if you don't see a leak. If it looks old, I say definitely tell them that they should consider it. It's protection for you. You know how that goes. 5 years down the road, you get that phone call. Well, you didn't tell me it was an old tank. You know, we've all been down those roads. You may not see a failure of an oil tank. They fail from the inside. So oil tanks are different. I mean, they rot from the inside, and that's the key. You may not see a failure. So that's why 25, 30 years old tank, really consider replacing it, because it may be ready to go at any point. And you know, for my colleagues here in areas where they don't have fuel oil that much, it's safe. You know, like I said, for my clients that come from other areas, they're all, oh, I'm so nervous about fuel oil. Well, this isn't Merrimack Valley, you know, like where all the, you know, natural gas meters blowing up and the fires and burning down houses. It's safe. It's, you know, your house isn't going to burn down because you have oil heat. It happens to be one of the highest burning BTU per unit fuels out there. So a unit of natural gas or propane burns at a lower BTU rate than fuel oil. That's why you get such a quick turnaround with hot water heaters and things like that with oil, because it's so hot. So don't be afraid of oil. Just know and respect it, and inspect those tanks, and you know, be an advocate for your client. Thanks, everybody. Any questions here? Any more questions?
Does anybody have any questions for Bob?
I
tell you what, I think you would say.
No, I got a private message here from Russ. If bottom feed see any kind of leaking, whether tank, fill pipe, or feed to the furnace or Beckett motor, you call further eval by professionals in your report. No, I don't call further eval. I call repair. If it needs a repair, it needs a repair. That's just my philosophy on that. If I see lines that are leaking, or especially with a Beckett motor, he said Beckett, which is a common one, or Carlin, that's another one. Quite frankly, they're almost identical. If I see those things, any leakage, or if it's an older Beckett motor, I'm saying go ahead and do that. Go ahead and get that fixed, and make sure absolutely annual inspection and tune-ups of oil-fired equipment.
Yeah, while you're on that topic, Bob, earlier you said that you talked about people, you know, running their tank out of oil and then go looking for oil. You know, what they end up doing is they end up requiring then a service call to bleed the line before they can start their water heater back up in the middle of July.
Yeah, yep. That's the problem. You know, they have to pump it all out and, you know, evacuate the line, get all the water out, which also sucks a lot of sludge, which does, yada, 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 but you just can't lead that horse you can't make that horse drink water, but please service it, or at least get, inform them of the ultrasonic, so it goes to their smartphone so they get an alarm, that at least they're smart enough to make that phone call. But I get it all the time.
Yeah, so it looks like somebody wanted to have a discussion about the cost difference between gas and between oil and gas.
Oil is a commodity. We had a nice mild winter last year, and right now oil's pretty low. Just like gas is a commodity. Propane is a commodity. The prices fluctuate. So I tell people this, especially when I used to do energy audits before the state of Connecticut decided to put me out of business. I used to tell people, if you took a 10-year average of the cost of all three fuels and you plotted it out on a graph, you'd see that graph, they'd cross each other all the way, and the graph average would be a straight line. They're about the same over a long period. Short periods, even a year or two, yeah, one's going to be higher than the other. Right now, fuel oil is cheap. Natural gas in my state's expensive because we don't have the infrastructure to bring it to us. Propane's very expensive because, quite frankly, it's a derivative of making gasoline. So propane's expensive. In other places, it's not. So really, it comes down to convenience. The conversion rate, of course, the push conversion. I've seen people rip out, 10-year-old boilers in homes, Weil-McLean boilers that are in really good shape, oil tanks are in really good shape to put in gas stuff, and it costs them thousands and thousands of dollars to make the change where they haven't even used the equipment to its lifespan yet. So, at time for replacement, that's the time to consider.
Mm-hmm. So it looks like we still need a little bit of clarity on this concept of the requirements of a tank, and a buried tank that's no longer in use, regarding abandonment and removal. And can we just kind of do a quick recap of that concept?
Right. My philosophy is, and especially here and anywhere else I go, if there's evidence of a buried oil tank, you want to ask your seller for that documentation of its removal. It's because once you purchase that property, you own that property, you own that tank. If there is a seepage from a abandoned oil tank, say maybe even had only a couple 100 gallons of oil in it, but you have a high water table, and that makes it to a sewer, and then all of a sudden it pops out somewhere in a stream. Well, guess who's responsible for all of that environmental damage? You, because you own it. It's just a matter of telling your client, and if it's still in use, explain to them even verbally, the ramifications of having that oil tank there, and their responsibilities. They can do some ultrasonic testing, some pressure testing, but most oil tank companies don't want to do that. Think about it. You pressurize the tank and then you split it and starts leaking. Who owns it? So yeah, see, the dog didn't like it either. So yeah, so quite frankly, if there's evidence of a buried oil tank, and especially if it's in use, take it out. Overall, it's just not a good thing anymore. They're just, they're not good.
Right.
Okay, yeah, I guess a point that I tend to make is that in many jurisdictions, there's a requirement, legal requirement, that if it's not in use, it must be removed, unless you get a permit or get a waiver allowing you to abandon it in place. So that obligation is currently pending on the current owner. And if you were about to become the current owner, there's actually some pressure that can be brought to bear on the existing owner.
Yeah, that's that's definitely something, you're trying to educate your clients. So if you have a buried oil tank, you want to get it out there, and you want to stress upon your client, because the realtor is going to get them off to the side and say, it's not a big deal. You know how they are. We all know how realtors are. So just, impress upon your client the importance of making sure that's taken out. I could tell you that I witnessed my tank removal. I put that in my contract that I was to witness the removal and the remediation, and I did. And they actually spilled about 50 gallons of oil. That's why they had to take away so much soil. It was a mess. So yeah, like I said, it cost them a lot of money.
You talk about ultrasound and pressure tests. Yeah, I never recommend a pressure test, but I know a lot of companies do core samples. They'll bore down at 4 corners of the tank and pull soil out from
Yep.
under them. And sometimes that's a recommendation you could make, but certainly further evaluation by someone not necessarily in the oil delivery business, but in the tank removal business.
Yes, I mean we all know, well, there are lots of oil tank removal companies out there. There's about 3 or 4 in Connecticut. Some of them go out, and then there's one company that's in the southern part of our state there, but they cover statewide. They'll do a ultrasonic test to see if the tank has been removed or not, with a ground penetrating radar. They're really good at that. If they do find an oil tank grave, they'll take core samples, like you said, Hollis. They'll take core samples and do that. I mean, but that all comes at a cost. And the seller, quite frankly, in my estimation, if they did it on the down low and didn't tell anybody and just had somebody come out and take it out and not document it or not get the proper permits, like anything else, show me the paperwork. Show me that it's legal, because down the road you may need that.
Yeah. I did an inspection a couple of years ago on a very nice, very expensive property in a location that decades earlier had been kind of a slum. So there were a number of buried oil tanks in that neighborhood, and but they're not very well maintained. So the builder had bought one of these lots, one of those premium lots, and then discovered, after he bought the lot and excavated to build a house, found uncovered the leaking tank, which had gotten into the aqualude and made it all the way to the Potomac River, make it down pivot around all the way to the Potomac River, and that bankrupted the builder.
Yeah.
That one tank bankrupted the builder. He
Yep.
couldn't finish that house and sell the house.
Yep. The environmental costs are just absolutely phenomenal. Just keep that in mind. So, again, you can only tell them so much. You tell them everything, and then, but you document it in your report, so it doesn't come back to bite you. It's one of the worst things. Buried oil tanks. When do we stop burying them? You can still bury an oil tank, at least in my state. You got to get a lot of permits to do that. They got to be triple wall. They're cost prohibitive.
Okay, well, I think that brings us to the end, Bob. That
Yeah.
was very informative. We certainly appreciate your time.